Okay, so deep bow to everyone. Glad that you are all making the decision to be here, whether you are joining in live or you are following along watching the recording. Um, Glad that you're here. We are gathering today to continue our Buddha book club, looking at this book called Flowers in the Dark, reclaiming our power to heal from trauma through mindfulness, through meditation. And this is a book written by Sister Dang Nghiem, who is a wonderful teacher, a Dharma teacher in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. And so we will be looking at that teaching and that practice together live. If you are here in the Discord, please feel encouraged to share your camera if you can. If you're comfortable, then it's very nice to be able to see you, wherever you are. I see Aaliyah and Anastasia here, and Georgia, Craig, and over on YouTube, JB, Kanagawati, Catherine, Robert, Spirit. Okay, nice to see you, Sam Hain, Suke. We'll just take a few moments to get settled in and kind of give everyone time to join us, everyone who wants to be here. Okay, nice to see you, Natty. Happy Friday. For a monk, every day is Friday, but I'm happy for all of you that it's Friday. And I hope that you can enjoy your weekend. Hello there, Missy on YouTube, and everybody joining on YouTube. Please feel welcome to say hello and let me know that you're here. Okay, Seki, thrilled to be a part of this. I'm thrilled that you are here and that you're a part of this. It's great. Okay, so let's start our practice together with a few moments of mindfulness. So go ahead and find your meditation position. Just find a comfortable and stable position for your body to be in. And before we begin with our reading, we can begin with some stillness. Can find that comfortable, stable position for your body. Close your eyes if you like and take a few deep breaths. Breathing in deeply through the nose, bringing the mind home to the body. Beginning to notice your heart, your breath, your body just sitting here. Beginning to switch from doing to being, from doing to noticing. And just taking a few moments to breathe and be aware of our body and our heart, as well as our intention and our sincerity to be here. Kind of putting a pin in this, that we really do want to be here, that this is where we want to be, and we want to look at these teachings together, and that we are exactly where we want to be. Just breathing and aware. So let's continue with our reading of Sister Dang Nghem's book, Flowers in the Dark, Reclaiming Our Power to Heal from Trauma Through Mindfulness. We left off last time with a letter from a young woman named Laura, who was going through suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, and found herself to be put into a psychiatric hospital temporarily. And she wrote a letter to Sister Dang Nghiem, the author of this book, telling her about how that experience of going into the hospital was actually really traumatizing and difficult. And Sister Dang Nghiem kind of emphasized the more that we can make ourselves or make someone else feel safe, heard, and protected, then we can create for ourselves an atmosphere of safety, and we can also begin to heal the trauma that we have dealt with, that we've faced, and that especially we can learn to be that for ourselves. We can practice to listen deeply and wholeheartedly to our own suffering, to our own difficulties, our own traumas. So we begin today with a practice, listening to your breath and body. A soulmate is someone who can listen to you with equanimity. In fact, this is what you do in sitting meditation. You listen to yourself. Being your own soulmate and providing yourself with a feeling of safety and security. This same capacity will enable you to listen to the thoughts and feelings of others too. Find a quiet and safe, distraction-free place to practice deep listening to your own breath and body. So a little exercise here and a couple exercises so we can follow along with these. Listening to your breath. Breathing in, I listen to my in-breath. Breathing out, I listen to my out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. Listening, smiling. You can quietly repeat these key words to help you cultivate your mindfulness and contemplation. Breathing in, I am aware that my in-breath is telling me that it is short, rapid, and loud. Or is it long, slow, and quiet? Breathing out, I am aware that my out-breath is telling me that it is whatever it may be. Aware of what the breath is telling me, breathing and relaxing. So practicing our meditation as a way of listening to the breath, listening to the qualities of the breath. What is your breath telling you at this present moment, for example? Breathing in, I listen to my in-breath. Breathing out, I listen to my out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. Listening, smiling. Listening to your body. Breathing in, I listen to my body. Breathing out, I listen to my body. Listening to my body, I am here for you. You practice meditation and can repeat these phrases. You can say, as you are practicing, listening to my body, I am here for you. I am attending to you. I am present with you. I am listening to you. Breathing in, I am aware that my body is telling me that it is tired, tense, and restless. Or, breathing in, I am aware that my body is telling me that it is relaxed, calm, and at ease. Breathing out, I am aware that my body is telling me that it is whatever that may be. Listening, noticing, attending to this present moment, experiencing what the body is telling us, what the breath is telling us. Does anyone have any sharing about this or idea about this? I myself find it to be a very insightful way to approach meditation. Not even like a special meditation method, not a like something we do so that we feel relaxed or that we get something out of meditation, but meditation as this deep listening to the body. Whatever it is, sometimes it's tired, tense, and restless. We listen to that. Listening to my body, I am here for you. We show up to the body in that way. Or it is relaxed, calm, and at ease, but we practice this listening to the body, to the breath. Anyone to share a comment about that? Is this the way that you usually approach meditation, or do you usually approach it in a different way? Okay. So Anastasia, you want to share something?
It's a very interesting way to become more in tune with yourself. So I think it's something that I would start doing.
Okay, thank you. Interesting way to become to kind of tune in, to become attuned to. yourself, your experience, your reality. We spend too much time, all of us, doesn't matter who you are. We spend too much time listening to our thoughts and our stories about ourselves, about other people. But this is to really listen to something that's a lot closer to our true self. Okay, so we'll keep reading. One comment from YouTube from Catherine. Catherine said, "This took my mind off of all the external chatter. It helped me to just breathe and become present with myself." Yeah, that listening to, rather than doing anything, listening, opening up to the breath, the body, this present moment. So now a variation, listening to another person's breath. When you are a soulmate to yourself, you will be able to be a soulmate to another person. Anchoring in your own breath and body while being aware of that person's breath and body. Establish yourself in the awareness of your own breath. So let's follow along. We can establish ourselves like this. 1. Establish yourself in the awareness of your own breath. 2. Establish yourself in the awareness of your own breath and body. 3. Listen to the other person's breath. What insight do you gain? Breathing in, I listen to the in-breath of the person in front of me. Breathing out, I listen to their out-breath. In-breath, out-breath. Listening, smiling. So I think it touches right at the beginning of this kind of variation, of the practice of deep listening. When you are a soulmate to yourself, you will be able to be a soulmate to another person. When we can listen to ourselves, then we can listen to another person deeply and truly. We can show up for them in that way. And here, explicitly not listening from the intellect, not listening from our cognitive mind, our thinking mind, but listening from establishing ourselves in the breath. Establishing ourselves in the awareness of the breath and body. Once you become more comfortable with this practice of listening to the breath and body of your own and of another person in a quiet and safe space, experiment and bring your practice to other situations where you are with more people in a less controlled environment. Notice how this awareness may affect the quality of your being, your listening, and your sense of safety and comfort. So this is a real kind of exercise, a formula that's going in line with Sister Dang Nghiem teachings here about healing trauma and using our mindfulness to become more comfortable in those difficult situations. So you can start with your practice of listening to your own breath, listening to your own body, attending to it. And there's some words you can use. Listening to my body, I am here for you. You can use this kind of mantra. Aware of what the breath is telling me, breathing, and relaxing. So once you begin to get comfortable in doing that with yourself, then there may be a trusted person in your life, a partner, a good friend, that you can also practice this with, to start extending out or experimenting out with that ability to listen really deeply. Okay, so that was chapter 1. We're on chapter 2 now. The way out is in. And it starts with a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, often called Te or teacher. When you breathe in, you bring your mind home to your body. A lot of the time, your mind is not with your body. But when they are together, you are truly in the here and the now for your transformation and healing. It is wonderful to be present, and your breath becomes the object of your mind, and you can become a free person. You can cultivate freedom. So I'll read this quote again. When you breathe in, you bring your mind home to your body. A lot of the time, your mind is not with your body. But when they are together, you are truly in the here and the now for your transformation and healing. It is wonderful to be present, and your breath becomes the object of your mind, and you can become a free person. You can cultivate freedom. So now continuing with Sister Dang Nghiem. My teacher often said, "The way out is in." What did he mean by the way out? He was referring to the exit from suffering, despair, jealousy, anxiety, depression, superstition, and all the mental states that haunt us day and night, giving us no rest. But what did he mean by going in? First of all, the way in means to gather mindfulness, concentration, and insight into our own body and mind, or more specifically, into what we call the 5 aggregates or skandhas of our being: our body, feelings, mental formations, perceptions, and consciousness. Instead of looking only at the outward causes of our suffering, we begin to look inward. When we learn to look inwardly at ourselves with love, but also with a degree of equanimity, this equanimity is like calmness, composure, a sense of balance, a sense of stability. So when we learn to look inwardly at ourselves with love, but also with a degree of equanimity, to observe how our mental states derive from a sense of our identity as a separate self, we can find a path out of suffering. So this last sentence was quite a lot there. Maybe we can discuss this a little bit. When we learn to look inwardly at ourselves with love, but also with a degree of equanimity, a balance, calmness, to observe how our mental states derive from a sense of our identity as a separate self, we can find a path out of suffering. So seems to be pointing here to this that a lot of our anxiety or depression or negative mental states arise out of this feeling or this sense of being separate from the world. This kind of separate self that's a victim or a perpetrator or good or bad or right or wrong or loved or not loved, but setting up this kind of separate self. So would you say that that's true, that many of the negative mental states that you experience or go through tend to arrive from this sense of our identity as a separate self? Anyone have some thoughts on this?
I agree with that um, to an extent. I think that if we show ourselves more kindness and give ourselves more time to be, more time to, I guess, give us, if we give ourselves more grace, if we're not as hard on ourselves, I think that that would help promote more healing.
Okay, thank you, Natty. Grace, yeah, that word grace is quite lovely. And maybe that word grace has something like a connection with not setting ourselves up as a separate self, as a separate self identity, not identifying as that, but grace is kind of, you aren't good, you aren't bad, you aren't right, you aren't wrong, you're not this, you're not that, but you are rather, you are loved, you are accepted, you are listened to in the present. That there's no grace, maybe, as there's no like aspect of yourself that puts you to be separate from everything else, that puts you to be outside of this space of love, of acceptance. Anushka, you want to share something? You have some insight?
Yes. Hello. Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to share that, when we get out of our minds, like, okay, this is for me, this is something that I have to take care for myself, and just kind of stepping outside that egoistic way of living, we, see ourselves as part of something bigger. We see ourselves as part of the earth. So not only are we becoming kinder and more gentle towards ourselves, but also towards anyone and everyone around us, which really promotes not only your own well being, but also everybody else's. I think that's something, yeah, like just finding that harmony and, um, yeah, I mean, it could be a really positive experience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anushka. Um, Gemma says, I think those qualities reinforce that sense of self. And when we concentrate too much on this, we become too self centered. And JB says, working towards interbeing and kindfulness. It's a work in progress. Definitely interbeing. definitely kindfulness. Kindfulness is your awareness, your present moment attention combined with kindness. So mindfulness and kindness together, kindfulness. And then that interbeing is a good point here, because when you set yourself up to be anxious, depressed, um, superstitious, maybe this is what you, Gemma, you were referring to these terms, I think. Um, Despair, jealousy, anxiety, depression, these haunted mental states, to maintain them and to kind of have them be very strong and alive, we have to set ourselves up as separate from so many things. We have to set ourselves up as separate from um, the world, to set ourselves as separate from everything, to get into these haunted kind of states of mind. Because if you're not separate from the trees and the fresh air and the desert sun, then how could you be so stuck in depression or anxiety or superstitious thinking? Because there's so much in our experience that, maybe we aren't really separate from, that is just alive and is an access point for mindfulness. We know our thoughts, we know our stories about other people, about the world, about the grass, about the trees, about the earth. Um, don't quite get to the reality of it. So there's this freeing quality that comes from not seeing ourselves as separate from anything. And when I've found when I really get depressed or anxious or stuck in something, I even see myself as separate from the body, because I'm not listening. I'm not listening to my breath. I'm not listening to my body. I'm not even listening to my mind in some way. I'm just stuck in this idea, this separate self identity of desire or attachment or chasing or wanting. And everything else is just excluded at that moment. Okay, so Catherine says, freeing the negative gives room for gratitude. Catherine also said over on YouTube, I think if we leave the mind unchecked, it's like a motor that just runs. So having a safe space to bring peace to ourselves is freeing. Wonderful. And Gemma says, it's a false comfort, yet it doesn't help. So if we can have that interbeing, we can then listen to our body and mind. This false comfort here may be that separate self-identity. That separate self that gets what they want, avoids what they don't want, or tries to convinces themselves that they can. Of course, we can't avoid and get what we want and what we don't.
I wanted to add something else to that as far as the separate self. Um, Personally, I have dealt with trauma, and I think having that disconnection, being in survival mode almost, allows you to kind of protect yourself and feel safer by disconnecting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that does sound like it makes sense, and I imagine Sister Dang Nghiem will talk more about this as we move forward. These kinds of things. So
I did want to.
yeah,
Is it
go
okay?
ahead.
Yeah. So I wanted to share two perspectives. One, we were actually just talking about in the chat room earlier. Like I feel like I have an opportunity to share some stories that a lot of people don't always get to hear, and that I thought it was interesting that you mentioned even that when you don't when you don't fall into that separate sense of self, you can't identify yourself as a perpetrator. And that's obviously not the subject of the book, but I took a class inside of a maximum security prison. And the one thing I was taking a class on restorative justice, and the inmates that were in the class, they had this sense of like wanting people to hear their story and have this sense of like people understanding that like they didn't just come to be in that position. They didn't just come to do the things they did of their own accord. Like there was a, they were embedded in an environment that brought them to that place in their lives. But for me personally, I found it. I've only recently started to realize how isolating trauma is, and it's this like this hyper vigilance where you just, for me, it's like this constant sense of distrust and seeing almost everybody as a threat, and this resistance to like engage and connect with anybody, and just like feeling isolated in like the rarity and uniqueness of my experience, and like how difficult it would be for people to relate and understand it.
Yeah, so trauma is not, thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. Trauma is certainly not relegated to, quote unquote victims. Um, some of the people who have the worst traumas are people who have done horrible things. That's a lot of what PTSD is for people who go through war. And then also to the point that you're speaking about, Jonathan, a lot of times those people acted that way not because they were, flew down from Mars with a bad intention in their mind, but they're traumatized people. They hurt people. Period. That's how it works. We're not that complicated. Hurt people. So um, recognizing that, I think, is also quite important for dealing with trauma. You don't have to be a victim to be someone who's experienced trauma, and people who act in unskillful ways, or a lot of the reasons that we act unskillfully is not because we are a bad person or what have you, but we've experienced trauma and developed coping mechanisms that weren't so skillful. Anyone else want to share on this?
Hello. I have another perspective from my own experience that I may share. Maybe I can see from the conversation that mostly is being focused on being trauma, being victimized, being a victim, or attacking a victim. As you said, hurt people hurt people. But just coming from my own perspective as well, my name's Seki, and I suffer from Parkinson's, so I'm constantly shaking from the inside and from the outside. And I was just going to mention that trauma sometimes isn't just always something you do to someone or something someone does to you, or if that makes sense. Personally, for me, I'll give you a basic situation. I practice meditation and mindfulness and keeping calm in my mind as much as I can. You can almost hear the shaking in my voice, but it is how it is, I guess. But I would be sitting down and lying down or something, and I'm constantly traumatized that it feels as if my inner body is being released from my body. I don't know how to explain it. It feels like I am shaking internally, but I can never find. I understand that it may be like a physical disease or something or whichever, but I'm struggling to understand and to figure out myself how to reach this peace and this calm. And that's a trauma for me. Constantly in a fear that my body is almost leaving me. Essentially, like your soul is leaving your body, kind of, if that makes sense. I just wanted to add something small like this relating to trauma.
Thank you, Seki. That's really insightful. I appreciate you sharing that. Anna, do you want to share with your voice about what you wrote? Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Is it all right if I say something?
Go ahead.
Right. I I suffer from CPTSD, which is basically just a lot of different traumatic experiences throughout my life. And somebody in here, I don't remember who, had mentioned disassociation as a coping skill, and I used that when I was in like traumatic situations, and I'm finding now that it's actually disrupting my daily life. I will have to focus on a task and I'll be really stressed out and I'll dissociate and I won't be able to focus on the task, and I like don't really have control of it yet. So I just wanted to say that it has a bit of a negative impact on my life personally.
Thank you, Rowan. Anna shared something that I will. You want me to read this out for you, Anna? Is it okay?
Thank you.
Anna says, I have a lot of conflict about disconnecting because speaking on it as the thing we do to deal with difficult and traumatic stuff, I do it a lot, and although it helps me to live, I try to avoid it because it's like a lack of attention. I put the feelings and sensation aside of me as they were not mine, and those are quote unquote forgotten later. But not as a good way of recognizing what is happening and identifying reality, but as creating a different reality for protection or something like that. So, not quite accepting and letting go, but more like trying to avoid and put to the side. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. And Laura says, trauma also causes a lot of fear and anxiety, fear that something bad will happen again, and that leads to developing coping mechanisms to handle that fear. For me, and that's very isolating and pushes me inwards, so good to try and focus on interbeing. I get stuck in this back and forth a lot. Okay. And Catherine said, I think about what you shared, Seki. Catherine over on YouTube said they understand that what you said. Okay, so shall we continue reading? This next section here is taking care of our mind. Let's continue. As a doctor, I worked with many patients in their dying hours. They would scream or cry, drenched in despair. All their untended relationships and unresolved pain would surge and become uncontrollable. In their last moments, deep-seated complexes would manifest in their mind with no mercy. To die peacefully We need to live peacefully. But how? We need to take care of our mental formations while we still have time, long before the moment of death. In my book, Mindfulness as Medicine, I shared a near-death experience I had when the brakes suddenly failed on a car I was driving at high speed. I came flying off the freeway with no way to slow down. It was the kind of exit ramp that spirals downward, and I knew I would not be able to stop. Holding on to the wheel, I saw my life like the frames of a movie flashing through my mind at the speed of light. I didn't think about it, and there was no time to use my intellectual understanding. I just saw, understood, saw, understood, saw, understood. I grasped exactly what each of those moments was about immediately, with no evaluation. At times like this, when we are close to death, our mind reveals our whole life to us in lightning flashes. I kept steering, and the car ran through red lights and green lights until it finally came to a stop on a deserted street. Overwhelmed, I immediately tumbled out of the driver's seat and walked until I found a supermarket and went in to get help. Not until after I became a nun did I make time to reflect and gain valuable insights from this experience. I came to see my unfinished business. I learned that the mind has a mechanism for trying to understand what is going on in our life and to resolve it. But if we are preoccupied with other matters, for example, if we are caught up in our work or in the pursuit of fame, success, or satisfaction on a superficial level, then the deeper needs are simply not addressed. The mind continues to try to process our traumas in our waking life and especially in our dreams. If we do not address the deep-seated complexes, suppressing them or running away from them, then this rumination and regurgitation of the mind becomes a habit. We suffer, but we have no way of embracing that suffering. Unconscious habitual actions become our way of life and form the path that we inevitably and inadvertently travel down. So we need to learn to take care of our unfinished business in our daily life, bit by bit, whether that is depression, anger, resentment, sadness, or other types of pain. As we address the past, we also take care of the present moment, because the present moment soon becomes the past and serves as the foundation for the future. We have this one chance to live in the here and now and to transform and heal, so that we don't have to chase after the tail of the past. In fact, we can only resolve our unfinished business in the here and now. The past is gone, and the future has not yet come. What we truly have control over is the present. Learn to breathe, relax, and have right view. That is, a way of perceiving the world as it is, so that we may engage with life most appropriately, and the mind does not have to regurgitate and ruminate past suffering anymore. Any thoughts about this part? I myself really enjoy just the simple line of, in fact, we can only resolve our unfinished business in the here and now. So I find that quite empowering, that right here in the present is the place to resolve and heal and kind of take care of that unfinished business. So if I'm here in the present, then I have an opportunity to take care of that, to resolve that, to heal that. Okay, so let's continue. Rehearsing suffering. A major obstacle to meditation is the tendency of our mind to get stuck in negative thinking. The mind rehearses the scenarios that bother us, ultimately because it wants to resolve the problem and to find a way out. Unfortunately, it may get stuck in its track like the needle of the gramophone stuck in a groove, repeating the same track ceaselessly. And Catherine over on YouTube just said something just like this. The brain is like a highway with many roads. If you keep going down the same highway, the result will be the same. And maybe I think we probably can all understand that quite clearly. But what's also true is that if you take a different highway, it's going to be different. The result is going to be different. And it can be drastically different from what we've known up to this point. But a lot of us, we have that habit, right? To be on the same, to go down the same. So finding that space to go the other way, the other direction, to take a new direction. So rehearsing suffering. A major obstacle to meditation is the tendency of our mind to get stuck in negative thinking. The mind rehearses the scenarios that bother us, ultimately because it wants to resolve the problem and to find a way out. Unfortunately, it may get stuck in its track, like the needle of the gramophone stuck in a groove. A gramophone is like a record player. So the record has grooves on it and the little dial touches it and then stays there and goes around. So unfortunately, our mind may get stuck in its tracks, like the needle of the gramophone stuck in a groove, repeating the same track ceaselessly. Trauma survivors are frequently troubled by repetitive, intrusive thinking. The mind has been likened to a search engine. You initiate a thought, and it gives you other thoughts related to it. For example, if we keep harboring hateful thoughts, they lead to more hate and violence. In the article From Hate to Love, an ex-neo-Nazi's journey to Buddhism, Arno Michaelis, a former white supremacist, shared that he had been ruthlessly violent to people of color. After his conversion to Buddhism, when asked how people could inflict pain on others and even murdered them, he replied, "Practice." When you practice hate and violence, it makes your life so miserable that nothing but homicide, followed by suicide, seems to make sense. Things like love and compassion and forgiveness and kindness and all the most beautiful aspects of our human experience not only become unfamiliar, but repulsive to you. Everything we routinely do can be understood as practicing and rehearsing. With this awareness, we learn to use our search engine mindfully and selectively put in our search bar only positive elements. In neuroscience, it is known that neurons that fire together wire together. When certain neurons fire together continuously, over time the connection becomes stronger between those neurons. The triggering factor may be a thought, a word, or a sentence, or an action, and then a particular neural pathway is immediately activated via electrical impulses and then the release of neurotransmitters. A whole chain reaction takes place instantly, just as an often used trail becomes a well-worn path. So I have to say this is really important. And sometimes we, maybe as a coping mechanism for our trauma, we may be searching for things that are right along the same rut of our trauma. And so we're still choosing to go down the same highway, only it's a side road, because maybe we want to, the stimulation, right? We get a practice of stimulating ourselves. We get a practice of going down that same rut just because it's kind of dug in. So Sister Dang Nghiem here is pointing to a very particular part of our practice to heal from trauma is to be careful about what you put in your search bar. Making sure that those things that you're getting involved with, those things that you are consuming, are not perpetuating or firing those same neurons again, those same pathways again. Michelle Walker says magnetic mirrors. Seki says like a new adrenaline. I think it's something like that. I feel that we have a natural kind of here Catherine said this. Catherine said, I recently found out that when you cry, it releases dopamine. I was crying every day. I realized I needed to make a conscious decision to stop this behavior. Right? Yeah, I think this is a very important point for a lot of us because we have the best, the kind of technology that we have, what we can search for, what we can access. We really need to be careful about it. And sometimes we need to make a conscious decision. Just because something is pleasurable, just because something releases dopamine, or because something stimulates us, doesn't mean that it's good for us, especially when we have a background of trauma that we're trying to heal and work with. And we know that we're still in that process of healing. So we need to be all the more careful what we search for, what we take in. Not because it's right or wrong or real or not real, but because we're on the path of healing. And certain things, although they may be stimulating, they may give us that shot of adrenaline that we so often like, it's too close for comfort. So we need to be careful about a lot of those things so we don't re-trigger, re-traumatize those certain pathways, especially when we're in that transition period, that healing period. To be more careful. Seki says, you will never grow if you never go out of your comfort zone. I think that's part of it, yeah. We stay in the same rut, or we stay in the same way of doing things, and we just take we've got one rut that is our trauma, or that experience that we had, what have you, or those experiences, and then we kind of move over a few inches or a few feet, and we start to dig there. We start to get involved there. Well, what's going to happen? That little space of separation is going to dissolve, and now we find ourselves that we've just been kind of keeping ourselves in the same place. So be willing to go out of your comfort zone. A lot of times the things that comfort us are not really good for us. They keep us locked in.
I'd like to add something, if that's okay.
Yes.
So just a few minutes back when I spoke, so I've always, like, for as long as I can remember, I've had really bad anxiety and like a panic disorder. So after I spoke, I feel like at the back of my head, I kept repeating that scenario and like, oh my God, did I say something stupid, or something like that. And it just like it kept going at the back of my head. And I tried to stay mindful, but then when you mentioned that your brain keeps repeating scenarios until you find, like, because it wants to find a solution. And I feel like when it comes to anxiety or maybe even trauma, your brain keeps repeating those scenarios in hope that it'll find a solution, but that solution doesn't really exist. It's not something you can find inside of you, if that makes sense. I'm not sure I'm framing it really well, but yeah. And like, to snap out of it is something that I guess we all learn in the process. And then I did, when I heard you say that, I snapped out of it. I'm like, why am I repeating this scenario? It doesn't matter. Why am I thinking of this over and over again? And then I still chose to spoke again. So yeah. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, I think there's not a solution from our intellect, from that separate self way of thinking about things. We're never going to find a solution from that. But in that listening from the breath, the body, there's a kind of healing that takes place, that can continuously take place. And that's what we can rely on. And that doesn't need to separate us from anyone else, from anything else, to make these big pillars of right and wrong, and was that perfect or not perfect? Well, I'm going to listen to my breath and my body. I'm going to go with that. Thank you for sharing, Anushka. Very much appreciated.
I think it's also triggered by fear. Um, Sometimes we would replay the same scenarios over and over in our head, trying to figure out a way we could have done things differently. And for me, so when my dad passed away, I thought about what I could have done differently. How could I have, possibly found, just saved him. So, and out of that, I started to think about things that didn't even happen. I started to think about my kids. What if something happens to my kids? How am I going to deal with it? And it was a lot of unnecessary negative thoughts, and it was all triggered by fear.
It was all triggered by what?
By fear,
By
just
fear.
being afraid.
So all of the kind of You broke up a little bit during that, so you're saying that kind of all of the complicated worry and things that you were getting involved with were not like coming from a real place, but just an experience of fear, and then it like blew out from that feeling, rather than it being like realistic ways to understand it or see it. Is it right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, I've always found it can be quite remarkable how things are not as they appear to be, not as we imagine them to be. But just a feeling of anxiety, the world seems to be an anxious situation. A feeling of fear, the world seems to be a fearful situation. But it comes back to this setting ourselves up as separate. Well, we're not separate. So going back to the listening. And Catherine said, ants, antagonizing negative thoughts. What's good is that you are aware of these thoughts. I understand when they come up for me, and they do. When they do, I tell to hush up. Yeah, that's very good. We can learn actually to talk to our minds in that way. Hush up is very good, but getting into a fight is not so good. But if you can develop your power of mindfulness, especially your power of kindfulness, then you talk to your thought, you can talk to your mind. Enough. I don't want to hear about that anymore. Not in a way of fighting, but to kind of relax and to settle that separated mind. Enough. But then we go back to a listening. We don't go back to um, doing some unskillful activity. Okay, so we'll just read the rest of this section. It's a little bit more to read, and then we will wrap up. Okay. So we just left off with the talking about the neurotransmitters, how uh, our routines and what we choose in our search engine, what we put in our search engine, leads to this cascade of action and reaction and neurons firing together and all these connections being made. We can trigger ourselves sometimes. Frequently activated neural pathways may begin to function automatically, manifesting as a habit or a habitual pattern, and this becomes your personality over time. Similarly, PTSD, they only need to hear a sudden sound, see something triggering, or even just think of an unpleasant experience, and immediately a whole cascade of reactions, thoughts, speech, and behaviors ensue. Someone who has been abused may be repulsed by the touch of their lover, or a combat soldier may start to scream exactly as if they were in a war zone. In this way, the trauma doesn't happen only once. It happens physiologically every time we live it traumatically with our thoughts, and then maybe corresponding physical activities. Even when you have a nightmare, your whole body goes through it. neurotransmitters are released. I had just share a story from my life. I had a teacher, a Zen teacher, one of the first Zen teachers that I knew about and connected with. He lived also at the meditation center that I first trained at. And he was, I think, a wealthy man, a wealthy person, older man, but at a certain point in his life, he was a really serious addict, like a heroin addict, I believe. And he was very involved in those activities. And he said, I'd done horrible things, the worst kind of things that people can do to each other and to themselves. And this always stood out to me, what he said, that when he would have a dream and those things would happen again, that he went through that again. So that he's still processing and working through and finding his path. He's like a Zen priest, finding his Zen, and part of that was recognizing that even in the dreams he was going through it again, but even that was not to be burdened by or self-fixated by. You didn't need to reject it to accept it. Didn't need to reject it to take responsibility for it. So that awareness without being separate, that awareness without getting stuck and can still take responsibility, that's what I went through, but how I respond to it, how I take care of it now is me, is what's going on. So that recognition of those qualities of mind and those habits and those experiences, just like inspiring, supporting factors to take care and to be your true self at this moment. When you do or say something negatively the first time, you may feel bad about it. But the second time, it may already feel less unsettling. You may tell yourself you are not worthy, or you may scream at your spouse, or hit the wall. The first time you do it, it is a shock. But the second time, you may feel less bad, and then the behavior may become a habit. Every time you get angry, you punch the wall. It can become uncontrollable. A habit becomes a personality, which then determines the course of your life and destiny. We have to rehearse in a positive way, so it gets easier to see the positive side of a situation. This relates to how we perceive our reality, which we discuss in more detail in this chapter. The sign or appearance of the object or situation may be exactly the same, but the state of mind determines how we perceive the situation. By practicing the 5 strengths, we can train our mind to be in a state of spaciousness, calm, positive, and able to perceive the situation with more clarity, equanimity, and a sense of possibility. Of course, genetic predisposition is a factor. Some people have inherited positive mindsets from their families, seeing the sunny side of life more easily. Their families may have a strong culture of appreciation and respect for each other. If you are one of those fortunate people, you can always practice more to recognize the subtle thoughts of judgment, discrimination, and anger, so that you can be even happier and help uplift others. For those of us who tend to be gloomy and in despair easily, compounded with the suffering of the past, our habitual mood makes it even more difficult to handle and transform the situation. Then we really need to have right view and right thinking. We train to be aware of what we are thinking. and to breathe with it, relax it, and change it to a more balanced view, recognizing the good conditions that are still available to us. We can remind ourselves, quote, smile, choose to think of it in a positive way, unquote. The more we become aware of positive conditions, however minimal they are, the more grateful we become. The 5 strengths and the 5 mindfulness trainings in parts 2 and 3 of this book provide active training in rehearsing for a joyful and content existence. It is entirely possible to create new, mindful, positive habits. This is certainly possible with the practice of loving speech and deep listening towards ourselves. Positivity and gratitude slowly become a new, mindful habit. Okay, so we can take a few moments to sit with this teachings today, this Dharma that we have read and heard from each other, and the last kind of affirmation or line that was given about smile. Try to think about it in a positive way. Try to consider the positive aspects of this condition, this situation. Let's take a few moments to sit together and listen to the breath and listen to the body with our mindful awareness. Listening and noticing the state of the breath and the body right now. So we'll finish today with a prayer of loving kindness together. So I invite everyone to bring their hands together and repeat after me. May I be happy, peaceful, and free. May those who are nearby to me be happy, peaceful, and free. May those who are far away from me be happy, peaceful, and free. May all beings throughout space and time be happy and free from suffering. May all beings throughout space and time be happy and at peace. May all beings throughout space and time be at peace. May it be so. May it be so. May it really be so. So we can chant sadhu together 3 times. And as we are chanting sadhu, you can kind of bring to the mind of sharing out and offering out your energy of mindfulness and healing. So welcome to chant together with me. Sadhu. 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 And we can all take a bow. Okay, so thank you all so much for gathering together with me and with each other. We're going to continue our Buddha Book Club, going through this book together Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 p.m. And you're encouraged to look back at what we've already read and to try out some of the exercises and to look more closely at what we've read to support and empower your practice. Okay? Wishing you all happiness. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
YouTubers, don't forget to leave a like. You can offer your generosity that way to leave a like. And yeah, thank you. Take care. And you Facebookers, you can share.